Hello, friends. Today is the 6th of May, 2025, and I'm going to do something for the next few days. I'm going to introduce to you some of the cardinals who will be voting in the conclave to elect the new pope. It is not at all my intention to introduce them, 2, 3 minutes each. To suggest who should be elected or would be elected or is likely to be elected. Nothing like that. It's simply to introduce rather the people who will be voting there for the next pope. That's all that I'm trying to say. Okay, so I am going to, for today, I have 8, and then I'll continue talking about something not altogether different, talking about a little bit about the Vatican and the atmosphere that was there for the last 12 years, which is rather worrying, actually, when I come to look at it and consider it. So in every video that I will be posting from now on, I will probably try to put 8 more at the end of the video or at the beginning. I don't know how I'll do it. Okay, but remember, this is just to introduce to you the people who would be voting. And I'm going to follow on this because I haven't done the research myself. But I don't know anybody really. I heard of Cardinal Sarah. Oh, by the way, someone corrected me again. Because I was saying at first Sarah, and then someone corrected me quite rightly, saying, I think you pronounce it Sarah, or something like that. And then I had a very nice comment from someone say, okay, you're a Spanish speaker, so pronounce it like as if it was a Spanish name, the accent on the last syllable with clear vowels as they are in Spanish. Okay, so that is your guide. So, okay, Sara, all right, short vowels, clear. Good, all right. So this is what I'm going to follow this lady. Let me then share here. Oops, where is it? Hold on, bear with me. Okay, do you see this is a channel that is hosted by this priest? It's a Spanish priest, very traditional. They used to have, together with lots of other traditional priests, they used to have a YouTube channel talking about just about everything. Highly learned history, the faith, everything. And they got into some problem with the bishop and he had to stop or something. Anyway, he's there again in this channel, but always very, very knowledgeable. And she has this woman who is a very knowledgeable person about the history of the church and the all that sort of thing. She's a doctor of, I'm not sure exactly what, but he introduced her as someone who's perhaps the person that he finds most knowledgeable about knowing the cardinals personally, even most of them. I don't know, she probably worked at the Vatican, apart from other things. So they're going to bring up practically all of them. At the end, she's so tired. She said, do you really want me to continue? But today, okay, so these are not in any order whatsoever. All right. So it's just cardinals who will be voting. An introduction to them. Apologies because the words and the countries are in Spanish. But okay, so the first one, and this is what she says. Okay. Cardinal Peter Erdo. from 2003, cardinal. She says he is a canonist from Hungary, actually a jurist, she says, more than a canonist, a born jurist, a man who had lived under communism, a man who is considered possible by some. She says, I think he's a highly qualified man. His discourse is always very intelligent, learned. He's a very learned person, okay? He combines very well faith and reason. And then she adds, personally, I'm not sure if he gets there as a possible. He's a very good shepherd. He has been many, many years in the Diocese of Budapest. Okay, the next one, she said, is Peter Tarkson, a cardinal from Ghana. Okay, and she says, oh, she looks at the picture and she says, oh, what can we say? All right, he's a good man. She never says anything negative, outwardly negative about anybody, but you have to, she's a diplomat, obviously, you have to sort of read or hear between the lines. He's a good man. He knows also about a lot about the judiciary, about law, justice. He is a relativist. He is a modernist, this guy. A highly pronounced modernist. But it's also true that he distanced himself from Bergoglio to a very large extent. And even though he is a modernist, like Bergoglio was, Bergoglio actually took him out of a prefecture and put him, she said, somewhere, I don't know, in the Political Society of Social Sciences or something like that, out of the way. And he did keep his distance from Bergoglio at the end. Okay, Cañizares, no. From Spain, no, he's very old. He's also a little bit, he's ill, actually. She's not even sure whether he will make it to the voting in the conclave. So no, but they're going through all of them in no particular order, okay? All right, and this is Cardinal Francisco Robles Ortega. All right, he's Mexican, from Guadalajara in Mexico. She said he could be actually emeritus already, in other words, retired. He's a cardinal who has been very courageous, actually, in the fight against drug traffickers, reported it, denounced it publicly, and doctrinally, he's very orthodox, a traditionalist. All right. Good. And then the next one, let me go on to the next picture. Okay. Oh, here he is. Cardinal Sarah. Okay, I have, I think, one video about him because of not of anything in particular, but because I saw his address, two addresses that he gave, one in Spanish and another one in French, and I thought he was worth knowing a little bit about it. Anyway, he is from Guinea, Conakry, I'm not sure what that means. Okay, she says, he's a cardinal very much admired. He is loved by many people. He's very strong in saying, among other things, that the church really needs to have a good look back at what is happening with the modern liturgy. The church needs to do that. She says, he is a man who inspires people. He's a man who inspires, and he is a very brave man. He confronted one of the few, or perhaps the only, no, not the only, one of the few who confronted forthrightly the globalists and the woke and all that. She says his views on immigration and emigration actually have evolved considerably. She says, I have seen Vatican documents where he had participated, and his vision on this topic in the 90s was very, very different from his vision today. It has evolved. Now he talks openly about against those who encourage or promote immigration or emigration. And he says that they are, quote, stealing the soul of those countries from where immigrants come to the West. Stealing the roots of those countries, turning large sections of mankind into nomads, away from their roots, their countries, their cultural and familial settings, stealing away from those countries. So he doesn't agree with the globalists who so encourage immigration, as Bergoglio was. And he is very, very open about this, very forthright. All right, the other one in Sri Lanka, Cardinal Malcolm Granic. This one from 2010, Cardinal. Okay. She says, very wise, highly educated, and above all, she says, prudent. I don't know whether she is referring to the virtue or to the spiritual virtue of prudence, or to the earthly virtue of being diplomatic. Could be both. She says, some people thought that he was apostle, but he actually had the, let's say in inverted commas, the unfortunate incident of having made some comments at a given moment about his country, saying that the government of his country was right to apply in certain cases the death penalty to those prisoners who, from prison, not only had they committed a crime, but from prison continued to commit criminal crimes or direct or lead or promote criminality in his country. So that in his country for many was too much, and he got into a little bit of trouble there. She says, but he is very orthodox in doctrine. In his diocese, he doesn't make it obligatory, but defends very much receiving. He's actually encouraging little by little, receiving the Eucharist in the mouth, as of course he was forever before Vatican II, and hopefully encourages people to do so on their knees, but he's not imposing it. She says he has leadership skills, was in the Curia in Rome for quite a while, but he said he was so totally disappointed or mad at it that he actually decided to leave and go back to his country, the corruption there and all that, with the ecclesiastical mafia there in the Vatican, you know, the P2 and all those. Okay, so and so he asked to be allowed to return to his country. She says in this photo, he actually looks very well. He looks very well put together. It's a, you know, it's an official photograph. He says, but actually in real life, he's always looks a little bit like too much as if as he had just received a beating or just got up or something. He always looks as if he's falling to pieces. But nevertheless, that is on the outward look. But she says he's a great defender of the traditional mass. But he is prudent. He does never get into, polemics. Okay, then Cardinal from Switzerland, Cardinal Kurt Koch. I hope I pronounce it properly. Okay, from 2010, Cardinal. She says, I met him personally. What struck me was his humility, real humility. Not fake humility, fake modesty, but she said that humility actually exuded from every pore of his body as far as she was concerned. There are some people who are, as we all know, pretend to be humble, but they are not. I could tell you, I'm reading a book. Oh, never mind. Okay. He's 75. He has been 15 years leading the dicastery for promotion for the unity of Christians. So in a sense, he's very ecumenical, but understanding ecumenism in the right way to attract people to other Christians to accept Mother Church as it were. Okay, not in a false ecumenicalism. Oh my goodness, ecumenism of everything is the same, it doesn't matter, and so on. No. So although he's ecumenical, she says, has given Bergoglio more than one headache. He was ordained quite late. Talking about this one. He is a man of prayer. Independently, when you get to know him, independently of his duties as priest, celebrating the mass and the breviary and everything else, he dedicates every day to sometimes even more than 1 hour to just in solitude to prayer. What else? He is wise, prudent, can be very diplomatic. She says, he might actually have a stronger, more firm personality than at first appears, than the one that you see at first. After the death of Benedict, Pope Benedict XVI, he was the one and only cardinal who, first of all, let me tell you this. He is continuing with the Ratzinger School, okay, and mentor to students on the theology of Benedict XVI. She says, I found this interesting. She says, when I interviewed him, I didn't want to ask him about this one particular thing because it might have been a little bit too personal and I didn't want him to feel uncomfortable or anything about it. But what he did actually, the thing that she didn't ask, was that on the first anniversary of Benedict's death, he was the only one who celebrated Mass in the Vatican on that anniversary. There were no other cardinals there. No one else from the hierarchy attending Mass there, just himself, the only one that you could see visibly celebrating Mass. But some of the cardinals and the hierarchy were actually, some of them, quite a few, in the congregation there attending Mass, but in sort of ordinary clothes, not as cardinals, not in their priestly vestments, as it were. They were there among the ordinary people who attended. He was the only one who had the valor and the courage to do this openly. It says a lot about the climate and the atmosphere lived in the Vatican during Bergoglio. I'm going to talk about this sense of fear that there was there, that lack of freedom. But it says a lot that there was only one cardinal celebrating Mass there. The others afraid to celebrate Mass. Can you imagine cardinals afraid to celebrate Mass in the Vatican on the first anniversary of the last Pope? And you get to the fear, because some of us, the faithful, we kind of do not see it. But within the priests and bishops and cardinals, it was like as if it was a dictatorship. You couldn't say anything out of line, or that's it, you had it. Loss of freedom at all levels. It is really horrifying what the church has been through in the last 12 years. And this is the last one for today. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo from the United States. And she just says plainly, I know nothing about him. I know very little, because they were showing her photographs. You see, the producer of the show was just bringing up these photographs, and of these ones he said, I really know very little of him. I believe he has a deafness, a little bit of a deafness problem, but I believe he's Orthodox. What means is traditional, yes, to an extent. A good pastor, but I know little of him. I believe he resigned in January. I don't remember his diocese. Some of you will know. Anyway, she's quite sincere, and she says, I really don't know very much about him in particular. Okay, so these are the 8 that I'm going to talk about today, following this lady. They go on forever, and the poor ladies are... Okay, so let me stop this now. And now some of the remarks that previous to that, the priest and this lovely lady, oh, I forget her name now, Paloma, I believe. Anyway, I'll look it up. Apologies. I will put it on the description box, okay? They were commenting on a few things, all right? And one of this is the priest, Father Zarraute, starts saying, you know, with all this voting and the Holy Spirit, and it's not the Holy Spirit who chooses the Pope. Sometimes you have to explain that to priests even, okay? It is not. The Holy Spirit inspires. The Holy Spirit moves, yes? But inspiration does not necessarily mean obedience. It doesn't mean that you're going to obey. The Holy Spirit moves you, yes, inspires you, but you can very well choose, no, I want this one. Yeah, it doesn't take away their freedom, yeah, to choose right or to choose wrong. Okay, the Holy Spirit moves us interiorly towards good and the practice of virtue, he says, but does not impose it. That is Catholic doctrine, yeah? Does not impose it. You are the one who decides whether to obey or not, whether to follow or not. In other words, the free will of man, I'm reading my notes here of what he said, the freedom of man does not get annulled or made null and void by the Holy Spirit. Because otherwise, our actions, he explains, our human actions would not be voluntary, would not be free decisions. And therefore, if they are forced, if they are not free and voluntary, how could you be judged? Yes, you're going to be judged on that choice that you took. He quotes St. Thomas Aquinas, saying, divine grace does not annul human nature, it perfects it. So he reminds us all that the Pope is elected by the cardinals. The Pope is the vicar of Christ. He's not Christ, obviously. He is his vicar, his ambassador, as it were, yeah, if we were talking in diplomatic terms. So we must be careful, he says, not to try to deify the Pope, okay? Hence, or those who elect him. That would fall under the category of superstition, actually. As Chesterton said, the less religion, the more superstition. So the conclave receives that inspiration. It's a special grace, it's a high responsibility. As Benedict XVI said when he was elected in 2005, he says, the cardinals elected me. Oh my God, everyone, no, the Holy Spirit, no, he was right. Now, so let me see, what else do I have here? Just a sec. Okay, so then he talks a little bit about what the mission of the Pope is. And there in the dogma from the 1870, so-called infallibility, he says, the mission of the Pope there was defined, okay? And what is define from the Latin definere means when you put boundaries to something. When you define something, you don't let it just, flow. You actually put some boundaries there about what that thing is or is not. He explains that very well. I love him. I follow him all the time. He says, so they defined the mission of the Pope. And this was Pio IX here. Quote, not to manifest a new doctrine, but for the Pope, to guard, or for the popes, to guard doctrine and defend the revelation transmitted to us by the apostles, what we call the deposit of faith, which all popes actually have embraced and the holy doctors venerated. What else does he say here? He says that many of the cardinals actually, although we like to perhaps speak against all of them, he says that the lady says that many of them are actually people of faith, people of prayer, many of them. We just don't hear about them too much. But there are many also, many who, she says, and I quote her here, she's rather funny. She says, the most diplomatic thing I could say about a lot of them is, how the hell did they get there? What are they doing there? Okay, that's her quote. Why were they designated? Because many of them, all they do is foster doubt and confusion, and in many cases, scandal. As St. Paul said, says the priest, quote, I see the good that I want, but do the wickedness that I do not want. I see the good that I want, but do the wickedness I do not want. Okay, so then they go on to speak about the church, about a few little bits and pieces of different things. And he says, to start with truth. Okay, the Catholic Church is universal. This is nothing new. But the lady says, and I don't know whether the priest, I think he agrees with her, but she goes on to say that I think this is a very important point. I have never thought about it before. Although it is a universal church, the Orthodox Church is national here. The Catholic Church is universal, but perception of the church is influenced very much by your place, where you are, your own particular culture. Doctrine is the same everywhere, but the reality of the church is not the same in all countries. It's not the same, for example, the perception in Africa as it is in Europe, as it is in the Americas, as it is in Asia. Why? Because in many countries, its development was how it came to be, how it grew, was very different under very different circumstances. For example, she says, the bishops and cardinals in Africa today are the first that have had actually, at the beginning, they had a very, very good formation in Catholic doctrine. Most of them were perhaps became ordained, perhaps in the 70s or something, when the changes, the breakdown of the liturgy and all that had already taken place. But in their case, they were still being formed by old-timers, as it were. Okay, so for the most part, there are one or two that are very, very modernist, but for the most part, they have a very good formation because they were seminarists, most of them, at the beginning of John Paul II, but they had been, the people who formed them were from the old school to a certain extent. And at that time, Africa was very much still a mission territory. Yeah. But then she goes on to explain, this is a very good point. I never thought of it. Sometimes, for example, from a European perspective, we criticize priests who do not concentrate on education, on doctrine, and they are there, social work and all that. And we tend to say, but it might be different in other places. For example, if you are in Haiti, let's say you are a bishop in Haiti, okay, where you don't know from one moment to the next whether your house or your hut is going to fall on top of you, where there is so much misery there, okay, that perhaps the emphasis there is actually it's not social work. We used to say preaching with the example. You remember the old saints, Father Damien in Hawaii with the lepers and so on. So in those cases, priests have to be involved in that everyday living, in every, helping people manage their life, survive as best they can. Yeah. So to talk about things about dogma and if they preach with the example, that perhaps is enough. So what she's pointing out, I think, is a good point, is that although doctrine is the same, it is the Catholic Church presents itself or is perceived in different contexts in different continents. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Then she goes on to say about this division that we have in Europe that has happened, especially in the last 12 years. Now, since Vatican II, we know that the church was divided. Yes. She's not talking about that division, about traditionalists and progressivists or whatever. But more and more in the last 12 years, we see it's not only these two bands. We see progressives and we see modernists and we see conservatives and we see traditionalists. In other words, and because of that strong hand from Rome of not allowing anyone to say anything about Bergoglio or his acts or his saying, it has become almost tangible. Okay. What is true is that as an example, the traditional Mass, the Mass of always, the Mass of my childhood, pre-Vatican II, it's on the increase. People are looking for direction. People are looking for something that fills their lives. Yeah, which the latter Mass, to what extent it's Catholic, one can put a question mark there. It is valid because it has the essential Eucharist there. But anyway, but the traditional Mass, they give us some statistics here. It's amazingly in the increase. In France, very much so. You wouldn't believe that, right? In France, the Olympics, Notre Dame, increase in France, in Italy, in Austria, some increase in Australia, some in Spain, quite a lot in Austria, a lot in the UK. We're talking about in proportion to the Catholic population. In the United States, there are 542 places that celebrate their traditional Mass, even though traditional Catholics there were, it didn't come to actual persecution, but the FBI, obviously, the Vatican didn't have a problem with the FBI going to it. They did say the FBI referred to traditional Catholics as terrorists. A woman there with 5 kids, terrorists. Okay. In the US, 542. In Spain, 34 places only. In France, 200 plus places with the traditional Mass. I think in the UK is 150 30, something like that. Okay. So what you have here, we mentioned two cardinals there, Cardinal Sarah and Cardinal Koch from Austria. Cardinal Sarah, for example, and others like him, want a total look at a reform of the liturgy. They say that this is absolutely essential because he has just gone, every priest is doing whatever they want. We're almost in, heresy here and apostasy. Other cardinals, like Cardinal Koch that I mentioned, believe in a fusion, a sort of a bringing both together kind of thing in order to avoid division. No, that is not going to work, my friends. That is what Benedict XVI tried to, well, no, he didn't try to do that. He said, okay, it's the new mass, but the old mass, okay, please, bishops, can you please allow it? Please, please, please. Well, of course, they didn't. What we have here is in many instances there is lack of education on the part of the priests, lack of purification, in some cases just lack of maturity, actually. Okay, let me move on to another point that this good priest makes. Many people, many priests, he says, have gone well beyond in the way they celebrate Mass, well beyond the limits. And when you go well beyond is perhaps for lack of virtue, for lack of knowledge, for lack of maturity. They're not teenagers. Perhaps not knowing that God works in the long term. We have an opportunity now, perhaps, for a new education, maturity. And we have to ask Catholics individually, perhaps to shake themselves a little bit, okay, and check the state of their faith. There is a lot of superficiality, a lot of sensationalism, headlines. In other words, all that in the world landed in the Catholic world. We are children of our time. We live in these societies. And what has been lacking since the 1960s under Vatican II is an lacerating, wounding lack of catechesis, teaching. And this lady was saying what I have said about myself many times. She's much younger than I am. But she says, it is amazing that when I heard my parents talking about the faith, and they didn't have a great deal of education, but they knew the essentials of the faith, what it meant, and she said, they knew things that I had to learn later. She said, the lack of knowledge of the faith is just abominable. And what is happening now, of course, is the last straw. Lack of knowledge. Catholics, she says, will have to shake themselves up a little bit. It is not only praying, it is rediscovering the faith, the beauty of that faith. In relation to, since we mentioned the lack of freedom and the fear, the reigning fear in the Vatican, the priest says, in the Vatican, there have always been power struggles. It's a human reality, the church being divine, but run by humans, the human reality, because we are all wounded. And that human reality, he explains, could even be seen to a certain extent in the apostles when they fight over who will be on your right and who will be on your left, and the rest can be there sort of cleaning the floor or something. That's the human element, yeah. He says, my thesis, however, even though there have always been power struggles, my thesis, however, since Vatican II, is that the fights are different. The fights are now ideological. They are ideological fights. That did not happen before, not because people didn't disagree, but is that ideological element that didn't happen before. It didn't happen before they had been infiltrated, obviously, by anti-Catholics dressing up as Catholics. You can't say, he explains, for example, that in the Council of Trent in 1563, you couldn't say that there were opposite bands. They disagree amongst themselves in that council, which was practically Spanish council, the Counter-Reformation. And the cardinals, whether they had been selected by the Pope or the Emperor at that time, we have this, of course, that is going to get that division, a certain disagreement is going to get a little bit more pronounced later, perhaps in the 17th century, between the Dominicans and the Jesuits. But his point is that although there were disagreements and they had to sort those things out, nevertheless, there were no opposing ideological bands. Even during that difficult period of the infallibility issue, there were, for example, Saint Antonio Maria Claret, who was against using the word. He didn't think that it was well explained and so on. But nevertheless, there were no ideological bands. They were just disagreeing on things, okay? But in Vatican II, there are ideological bands there. And that's being kind. This is me now. That's being kind, ideological bands, because I think that they are different ideologies, really. Different theologies, really. That's mine. But he says in Vatican II, there are no ideological, in Vatican II, there are ideological sections. And it's not just the progressive versus the conservatives. There are three parties there. At the moment, the progressives, the modernists, and I insist, I think they have a different theology, but in any case, the progressives, probably the majority, since 80% of them were put there by Bergoglio. They have a lot of influence. This is the world here. Lots and lots of money, lots and lots of media. Then you have the traditionalists, who is the progressive, you could say that is actually a minority, a large minority. The traditionalist, a small minority. And then you have the great majority, which is somewhere in the middle. Some of them don't even know at this stage what's happening. Regarding the liturgy, he says that Cardinal Roche, English, whom Bergoglio promoted to the Vatican to a prefecture, but I don't remember which one. In a little bit of a sarcastic way, he says, he might have been illuminated by the Holy Spirit. He's one of these progressives, modernists. He says, because he actually told the truth when he was thus promoted. He said that the church's theology had changed in Vatican II, and therefore that needed a different liturgy. And this priest says, yeah, and I agree, a different theology, a different church. And of course, he said in this moment of truth, of course he needed a new liturgy. And when he said that, the lady in that video says, actually, he did say that, but he has recoiled now. In the last weeks before Bergoglio's death, he actually backed down a bit. Oh well, yeah, not so much. But when he came to the Vatican, my goodness, was he like a rooster there? I mean, saying not at all the traditional mass, he was practically willing to send traditional priests to Siberia there. I mean, if possible, what a rooster he was. Peacock. Sometimes I would like to turn roosters into capons, Anyway, so they continue. The new Mass of Paul VI follows that Nouvelle Theology. And the thing is that Benedict XVI had tried to find a solution. He had tried to allow both in order, as he saw it, to enrich one another. No, they don't enrich one another. That is difficult because they follow different theologies. One could almost say contrary, but perhaps that's going too far. But yes, it is necessary, a good look back, because this new Novus Ordo is becoming old and tired and boring. This Novus Ordo Mass is uninvented. They made it up, and it is sacrilegious sometimes. This was Bonini. He said he was a Freemason. I'm not obsessed. He said it. And then the Pope had no choice but he sent him to Tehran, I think. He should have been defrocked. He made it up with his friends. I told you so many times that one of the Eucharistic prayers was written up in a pizzeria. It's horrid. It's just horrid. They brought in new readings from the Old Testament. They changed. What is wrong with readings from the Old Testament? Nothing. But we see this Protestantization of wanting to put the Old and the New Testament on a par. It is the continuation. I always say the Old Testament is the prologue of what was to come. What is wrong with it? Nothing wrong with it. But it's not the same. All right. But what did they do? My goodness, do I have time to go through all the changes that they've made? Yeah. New types of readings, they made them up. New types of prayers from the Jewish tradition, did away with all the prayers that had been said forever at the offertory, at the foot of the altar, the Psalms, for example, I will go onto the altar of the Lord 3 times. All that changed again. The number of readings. They did away with the introible, yeah. Of course, the most obvious ones, the looking towards the Orient, that is very, very old. Not the congregate, not the people. The first change that Cranmer did in the English church was to change and to have the is it the priest? The vicar facing the congregation. He thought that that was extremely important. We know why. So in the Old Mass, of course, both priests and faithful look towards God. There we had the tabernacle. We're not looking at each other. But okay. And that the looking to the Orient went back to the 300s, actually. I think the Saint Gregory the Great in the 4th century actually codified it. Yeah. What else do they talk about? Yeah, I thought that this was interesting. Another point that they discussed was they had been talking about all manner of things, and then they come to the United States. And the priest says, it's very interesting what is happening in the United States. And he goes through explaining, he says, for example, in the 1940s, there was an amazing increase in the number of converts to Catholicism in the 40s and even in the 50s. There was that was, he says, the clearest symptom of that resurgence in of Catholicism. There were those programs, for example, for Archbishop Cardinal Fulton Sheen, who were on radio and then on TV, who were followed by millions and millions and millions of people. There were many, many conversions. And he said, one example, even Hollywood, before it was the Hollywood of today, managed by different interests, even Hollywood would make films. Well, we know the main change was they used to make old-fashioned films. Those films are about, they have a story and a development and was story, okay? All right. But they even did films like, not only Ben-Hur, but before that, it was, the Fatima and all this, and this priest talks about, he said, one film that I just saw, and this is from the 1940s, Hitchcock, who was Catholic, not the best of Catholics, but who is, had his things, but nevertheless, an old film, which is called I Confess, with Montgomery Clift there as a priest. And it was about the power of the confessional seal that priests have, that they can't say anything about what they hear in confession. This has been actually very closely guarded, as a matter of fact. And in the film, and this was based on a true story in France that happened. And eventually the priest is himself accused and found, well, I don't want to tell you just in case you want to see it, but you can find it. And I found it free of charge. So I'm going to put the link there. I don't know whether it will work for you or not, but it's a great black and white old-fashioned movie. But what happened after this resurgence of Catholicism in the United States? Well, everything began to change. And then we have a conversion and inversion, and then we have Billy Graham and so on. The whole thing stopped. Okay. And then he says, if you, for example, compare that film, I Confess, of the 40s, to the next one that came in the 70s, which was sort of Catholic, inverted commas, The Exorcist, you already see what had happened in the church. Because there, I saw it when it came out, so I don't remember exactly. I don't remember it. But he says, you see there the changes because you have the new modern priest. He's not dressed as a priest. He's just one of the moderns, okay? And then the exorcist, I believe that he says, I don't remember, comes an old-fashioned priest with his cassock and his stole and, where is this coming from, kind of thing. I don't remember the movie. Perhaps I'll have to watch it. I just remember the girl with the hair like that, green, but I don't remember anything else. Anyway, he talks about that, and then he says that modern priest, he doesn't pray. Everything. His life lacks meaning. Okay, what else? Then they talk a little bit about the bureaucracy, which is a problem. The bureaucracy in the, let me just, hold on, let me get my notes here again. Yes, got them. Okay, so then they talk about the bureaucracy, which as in the real world of ours, like in politics, is growing and growing and growing. And in the political social world, we have this, okay, so he doesn't say this is my, okay, so we elect our representatives, but then those representatives who in olden times used to discuss and deliberate and so on as to laws, and that a lot of it has been passed on to NGOs, and they are the ones who, unelected, decide about rules and regulations. You need this license, you need to pay this, and you need to pay that, and you need this, and you need that. And even though it hasn't been debated in Parliament, eventually it becomes law. Eventually, Parliament will give its approval to that. But they are the ones, in other words, such a bureaucracy that governs our lives without the people having elected these bureaucrats. And because it's happening in our world, it happened before in the Catholic Church. Yeah, what is happening today in the world happened in the 60s in the Catholic Church. Hopefully, if we have a good renewal, perhaps that will come to the world too. Anyway, so they talk about this bureaucracy, the oversizing of the Roman pontificate. This is verifiable. We have it there if you want to look at the statistics. This had not occurred in previous times in the church. Precisely when the church was flourishing in saints, in theologians, in doctors of the church, apostles, missionaries, and growing in cultural, intellectual, educational, social influence, we had very, very little bureaucracy. And now it has turned into such a bureaucratization that is almost impossible to control. He says, it looks as if, it looks as if the more the faithful, the less the bureaucrats, and the less faithful, the more the bureaucracy increases. there was no bureaucracy in the curious before, in the curious. It is striking that the more de-Christianization, the greater the bureaucracy, he says. So there is here an inverse process going on. The less faith, the greater the number of bureaucrats. Yeah, that is what we have to prevent, turning it into another United Nations NGO, which is what was becoming. I don't know whether this process will be stopped. Let's hope it is. But this is true regarding the numbers, the statistics, and it's nothing to do with the faith. It has to do with efficiency. Oh, please. What has happened, he says, is that what these bureaucrats have sold us, the Catholic faithful and the Catholic naive, what they have sold us, because they have substituted truth for authority, thus abusing the obedience that ordinary Catholics feel that they have to carry out. Substituted truth for authority, says this priest, which is horrid. So now they tell us, what they sold us is that bureaucratization is a kind of, is kind of the will of God, this thing, okay? You see, inspired by the Holy Spirit, yes. This is what the ecclesiastical bureaucrats, all those people, they are the ecclesiastical functionaries, are selling. No, no, no. But you see what happened is that whoever criticized that bureaucracy that doesn't stop growing from the clerical side of it, what they said or accused them of was that not to be in communion with the church, not in communion with the Pope, because these gangsters have substituted truth for authority. So if you don't accept our human, all too human decisions, bureaucratic decisions, which we have clothed with this weak, flaccid spiritualism, sugar-coated. That's me, not the priest. They say that is the divine will, as if it was truly spiritual. And then you're out. They kicked you out. They kicked the priests out. If you disagree, does this sound familiar? If you disagree with me, you are a Putin lover or an anti-Semite or something. Does that sound familiar? The traditional Mass celebrated throughout the ages. There are many there at the moment, these old and not so old bishops and cardinals who are from the 60s, 70s, and they still think it's a Woodstock thing, you know, in Vatican II. For them, it's the traditional Mass, for them, is an ideology. Tradition. They don't understand it. They are not men of God. They're not men of prayer. They don't understand the faith. I don't know how they got there, except that many were encouraged for the last 100 years to enter seminaries and all kinds of things. This has been going on for a long time. But the thing we're talking about it is that it has reached the climax now. Yeah, we can see them. They are there. What is going to happen? And because they have brought in so many laity at the individual curious. You have all these women there already. You know what is going to happen? What is happening already? They bring in their relatives and their buddies and everybody else. The whole thing is becoming rotten, is breaking into pieces. This needs to change immediately. During the papacy of Bergoglio, this woman who knows the Vatican inside out, there has been a feeling of fear so great, of dread, an atrocious lack of freedom, atrocious and horrifying, she says, that had not been there previously, not in other pontificates. The church was already, since Vatican II, has been divided, and it certainly was divided during Benedict XVI. But this fear that if you say anything against, you're out. First of all, I'm just thinking, because you see, I don't know canon law. Okay, I don't know anything, but but I just know what I learned when I was 8. I keep saying. But look, the bishops are the successors of the apostles, right? I don't even know whether the Pope can sack a bishop. Does he have the authority to do that? I suppose that you could excommunicate someone who is teaching against the faith. I don't know what the procedure for that would be. But for a bishop who is a descendant of the apostles to criticize what the Pope has said, not ex cathedra, but on an airplane, and immediately place him as an enemy and then sacked him from his diocese, is that legal under canon law? They have behaved. It's like living under Stalinism. What is this? This woman says it was atrocious. The fear, it had never been felt to that extent. Look, she explains, climbers, people, wanting to get to the top, flatterers, that has always been, is part of human nature, isn't it? In politics, in your job, whatever it is, you have these people up the greasy pole and so on. So that has existed always. But there is, nevertheless, as it is in politics, as a matter of fact, there is a difference between climbers and climbers. There are those who want to get to the top, but they have the in business, in politics, whatever it might be, they have some sort of qualification. They know they have the skills to get there, but there are others who don't even have that. They are the they just want a career. In politics, we see them, they just want a career, and they're not, they don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, so what else do they say? Okay. Okay, so I'll leave it there. They continue. So in my next video, I will talk about something, but I will cover another 8. Okay. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye.